The shroud may be traceable to the time of Christ, but is it an image of Christ or a painting by a very clever artist, as first claimed by Bishop Darcy and several modern-day scholars?
If it was the shroud of Christ, it would have to be made up of embalming materials and blood and other body fluids. What we found microscopically were pigments. Pigments used by an artist, and a paint medium that was commonly used in the Middle Ages. This proves the shroud is a painting, a beautiful painting, but nevertheless the work of an artist.
I don't believe the theory because there is so little pigment shown in the image areas on the shroud, and the image itself only consists of degraded cellulose fibrils, which have a yellowish color as viewed by the human eye.
The true relic experts totally disagree. They contend that the molecular paint traces found even in the unimaged shroud areas are simply dust particulates acquired over the years. Equally, they argue the unique effect on the fibril surfaces cannot be produced by any known paint, and far more resemble a radiation burn than any kind of intentional coloration.
The shroud is definitely not a fake or a fraud. Many of today's most distinguished scientists are convinced the shroud is genuine.
Many people have sent me images to compare to the shroud. The VP8 analyzer can clearly distinguish a man-made picture from the real shroud image. The slope of a man-made picture is uniform, and it rises to a fixed plateau.
From supermarket art to the world's masterpieces, no painting possesses true three-dimensional qualities, and the VP8 analyzer clearly proves it.
The slope of the image on the shroud is varied and agrees with the shape of a real face. We found that in the shroud's image, there's encoded three-dimensional information, which an artist could not have put there.
A particularly sensitive point of discussion with scientists on both sides of the issue centers around what appear to be blood stains. The question is, are the stains actually blood? And if they are, how did they get there?
According to medical physicist Dr. John Heller and blood specialist Dr. Alan Adler, when paint is x-rayed, it shows up quite unequivocally. But these x-rays of the shroud do not show the blood spots, which means that the blood could not be paint. They determined not only that the markings on the shroud were indeed blood, but blood highly loaded with bilirubin, a bile pigment that would only show up if the dead man had been jaundiced or severely and traumatically beaten.
On the other side of the ocean, and working independently of Heller and Adler, the noted pathologist Pierre Bamballon came to the further conclusion that the blood spots on the shroud were human and of the type AB. But even if it has been scientifically proven that the image is not a forgery and that the blood is indeed real, what proof is there that this linen cloth is the burial shroud of Jesus Christ? Could a modern forensic pathologist be able to tell anything from an examination of the shroud? Dr. Robert Buckland is a former coroner and forensic pathologist of Los Angeles County. He is well acquainted with images of violent death.
This is the body of a 5-foot, 11-inch Caucasian male weighing about 170 pounds. On the head, there are blood flows resulting from numerous puncture wounds on the front, the back, and the top of the head. There's a swelling over one cheek consistent with a beating. The right wrist is covered by the left hand, but there is a puncture wound in the left wrist consistent with a crucifixion injury. The classical, artistic, and legendary portrayal of nails through the palms is incorrect because the structures in the hand are too fragile to hold up the weight of a man of this size without tearing free. There are streams of blood running down both forearms, originating in the wrist areas and controlled by gravity, so the blood flows toward the elbows with the arms elevated and outstretched. On the back, there are more than 100 lesions which appear to be scourge or whip marks. Historians have indicated that the Romans used a whip called a flagrum. This implement had 2 or 3 thongs, and at their ends were pieces of metal or bone which looked like small dumbbells. Here you can see how those end pieces from a Roman flagrum fit precisely into the scourge lesions on the body. Here on the front of the body is a large blood stain resulting from puncture of the chest by an instrument like a lance or a spear. This weapon penetrated the thoracic cavity through the pleural spaces and into the heart. Later, after the corpse was removed from the cross and turned, blood dribbled out of the chest wound and puddled along the small of the back. There's an abrasion on one knee consistent with a fall. Finally, a spike has been driven through both feet and blood leaked from those areas and has stained the cloth. The evidence of a scourged man who was crucified and who died of postural asphyxia and cardiopulmonary failure is clear-cut.
The coroner's report fits every recorded detail in the Bible account regarding the beating of Christ by the Romans. It matches perfectly with everything we know from the Bible about the death of Jesus Christ.
Impressive evidence indeed that the shroud could be the actual burial cloth of Christ. Even more evidence favoring the shroud's authenticity was forthcoming. In 1978, when the Shroud of Turin was exhibited for only the fourth time in the century, a team of 40 scientists known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, using the latest high-tech equipment, examined the shroud for 5 intensive days. During the next 7 years, this tireless group spent 150,000 man-hours studying, testing, and interpreting the data from the shroud, making it the most intensively studied artifact in history. But the shroud advocates received a serious setback when one test, a carbon-14 dating analysis, produced disappointing results. An international news agency report stated that a test performed by scientists in 3 countries indicated that the shroud dated from the Middle Ages, somewhere between the years 1260 and 1390.
The radiocarbon dates that we obtained clearly put the shroud in the Middle Ages.
Carbon-14 is never used as a sole litmus test, and yet the mood of the day seemed to accept the dating without question, and the press leaped to unwarranted conclusions.
Carbon-14 dating is far from an exact science. Freshly killed mollusks show they have been dead for 3,000 years, while bristlecone pine, the oldest trees on Earth, always date too young by 2,000 to 3,000 years.